Can almost smell it at this point. 11 days and counting. Welcome in, everyone, to USC Trojans Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. You know the deal. You can get yourself settled in for the next 60 minutes. Leave those comments and questions. You ultimately produce the show. Matt Zemick's on the line from Trojans Wire. Of course, he makes this show go 65 consecutive weeks, folks. And let's get revved up with some fall camp news and notes. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Doing well, Mark. And, obviously the realignment wheel keeps spinning and, we'll talk about that later on in the show. But, just in terms of what USC fans are really focused on, it's preseason camp. And I think the first and foremost thing on the defensive line, like the coaches, you don't want to talk up a group too much when you're in USC's situation where the defense really needs to prove it on the field on Saturdays this fall. But you also, if you think you have a better situation, like you don't want to exactly ignore it, push it under the rug. You don't want to sell players short. You want to note progress if it exists. You want to note, good developments if they exist. And so, without trying to oversell anything, the USC defensive coaches, like including rush end coach Roy Manning, and this is from the reportage of 247 Sports. The guys at 247 do a great job covering USC. They think they have more bodies. They think they have more depth. They think they have more quality. They think they have more options in terms of being able to rush the passer, in terms of being able to make an impact on the defensive front and also just at the rush end position specifically. So they really do think that there's more depth and more quality just a week and a half before the start of the season. So that has to make USC fans look good. And I think that's actually a good point of emphasis, that instead of getting, falling in love with one guy, like the USC fan base would love to see Corey Foreman be the guy, and you'd love to see certain players step up. But it's less about the individual player, right? It's more about the unit. It's more about the team. It's more about the overall result. If Corey Foreman doesn't do it, Romello Height might do it. And Romello Height, that's a particular story. Like, he's healthy. He's getting noticed in camp. He's been working on techniques and how he, hones his craft and polishes his game as a rush end. So that right there, like, that's really good news. That's a tangible addition, not so much, in terms of, adding him to the roster in the offseason, but just, when you get an injured player back, someone who didn't play last year, you get him back this year healthy. That is like adding a player, essentially. And that is one of the things that, if you've watched Tim Prangley and Rick and I on Trojan Conquest Live every Sunday here at the Voice of College Football, that's something that they've talked about. It's something I've been mentioning as well, that there were so many players like Zion Branch, Damani Jackson. You could go through the roster, find other examples. Players injured last year weren't able to play extensively, and that factored into the lack of depth with which bit the Trojans in the backside at the end of the season in the Pac-12 championship game and also in the Cotton Bowl. So it really, like, it's not sunshine pumping, just trying to find something positive when the reality of the situation isn't as good. It's not sunshine pumping, I think, to say that USC has more bodies, that USC does have more depth. But I think, where the word of caution comes in is, don't be too sold on this player or that individual. It's more about, okay, this coaching staff, Alex Grinch, Sean Nua, the rest of the defensive brain trust, they have more pieces they can play with. They have more pieces they can move around. And that goes into one of the big themes of the offseason, is that with this gentle ramp up, with a soft, mushy first 6 games of the year before that nasty back-ended schedule, this coaching staff, this defensive roster will have time to ramp up. It will have time to identify who's the best fit at each position in each role. It's not as though it has to be locked down in week 1 or week 2. No, you have a schedule which is conducive toward experimentation, giving players lots of chances in different spots for varying snap counts. And the key is find your formula, find your depth chart, find your hierarchy by October 14th in South Bend against Notre Dame. So saying that USC has more depth, it's not sunshine pumping. Like, that seems to be a pretty solid, reliable truth right now at USC preseason camp. And that is something which definitely should make USC fans happier. But, in terms of promising that certain guys are going to step forward, that's where we get into, that's where we need to put up the caution flag. But just having more options, like maybe this avenue that we hope for doesn't work out, but someone else could fill that need and fit that bill. So that's a very optimistic note from preseason camp at USC.
Yes. Sometimes Matt and I will reference the halogen days of our youth and watching college football in the early to mid 80s. And that's when you decided these are 4 defensive linemen and we're going to wear them out. They're going to play every down. And, that's the starting 4, looking at the NFL at the time, that was the days of the doomsday defense and the steel curtain and the purple people eaters and the fearsome foursome. And all these 4 guys, they play every down. They play the entire time. No. And at some point it was determined, okay, you can go to the second grade of player who's almost as good and you keep them fresh and you keep them going. And now we see really everybody, but certainly the elite teams come at you in waves and waves of players. And that's a benefit, not just in game keeping players fresh and over the season keeping players fresh, but it's also a safeguard in recruiting, that if you recruit in waves, you're going to have some misses. Therefore, hey, if you've got a defensive line room rotation of 8 or 9 and 6 or 7 are really good and a couple didn't pan out the way you would have liked, well, you're still extremely strong.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. I would note, though, that in this particular season, given the dynamics and the nuances of the schedule, that point about freshness is extra important this year because of, and it's worth mentioning again one more time before we kick this thing off on August 26th against San Jose State. 9 straight games, 9 straight weekends with a game, week 4 through 12. It will be important to rotate bodies. It will definitely be important, not just to make decisions based on who's playing better, but even if someone's playing better, the coaching staff cannot overload specific players with too many responsibilities, at least if they have the chance. We get into week 5. That would be against Colorado on September 30, or it's game 5. That'd be, yeah. So you have game 5 against Colorado on September 30th, and you have, a bunch of 4 guys on the defensive line who are just hitting it out of the park, who are doing an awesome job. And you have a 38-7 lead in the third quarter. You need to yank those guys, even if they're playing great and they're absolutely crushing everybody. No, you need to pull them out, so that they're not getting too many snaps. You need to give the backup some work, and you need to make sure that everyone is fresh for the gauntlet. Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, Oregon, 4 games in 5 weeks against elite high-end competition. So, one of the great things about this season, I mean, great in the sense of, interesting and being a revealer of just how professional this coaching staff proves to be, just how on the ball it is or isn't. Like, we're going to learn how good this staff is in terms of allocating the snap counts, provided that, USC has enough of a lead that it becomes a possibility. Obviously, if it's just a 7-point game in the third quarter, you can't really play around as much as you'd want. But if USC is leading by 24, 27, 30 points midway through the third quarter, of those games that it should dominate, against ASU on the September 23rd, against Colorado September 30th, and against Arizona on October 7th, this coaching staff will need to be rotating people in and out, so that 9-game stretch getting into the middle and back end of October on into early November, so that the fuel tank is full for the most important moments of this USC season. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
The USC offense, of course, after that performance in 2022, can only get so much better if it were performing at the same rate that it did 90-some% of the time in 2022. Everyone would be satisfied and certainly think that to be up to expectations. It's the defense, of course, that everybody's pointing to. Matt, has there been anything that's been stated, whether that be coming from Alex Grinch or Lincoln Riley, or any trusted members of the media regarding, because I think of a question I asked Ryan Day at Big Ten Media Days concerning Ohio State's quest to improve the defense, about either, is this defensive scheme unrelenting, not going to change? We have the scheme, we have the approach that we want. It's all about the players getting better physically, getting better at their assignments, their technique, their tackling, their play recognition, all the things that they need to do, that we need to develop them to be better? Or is there any thought to maybe the scheme and the approach needs to be tweaked as well?
Well, so I don't have a 100% answer, but I do have a strong lean, and it's to the former. That they're going to try and continue to teach the way they did last year, because they got all those turnovers, they got all those takeaways. Like Alex Grinch really believes in teaching to take away the ball. So from what I've heard of him, from him, he believes in what he's doing and how he's doing it, and also they believe with another year of strength training with Benny Wiley. This is something Tim Prangley has mentioned on Trojan Conquest Live, just having another year in the weight room, another year under this strength and conditioning program. And then, of course, getting more and better dudes in the portal and on recruiting, just, having that second year, that second cycle, the veterans having a much better level of familiarity with the operation and how it's run. I mean, it definitely leans toward that, but I would have to think underlying all this that, if Alex Grinch is not prepared to make some systemic tweaks and is not thinking about, okay, how can we get more 3-and-outs this season? Because we didn't get very many last year. And how good can USC's defense be if it's not taking away the ball? That was a huge question that we all wondered about. They were getting so many takeaways in the first half of the season, the first 6 games, which was basically a perfect start for this Alex Grinch defense. And as soon as the turnover faucet got shut off, we all worried what's going to happen now that the takeaways aren't flowing to the same degree. And we saw the answer. So, outwardly, the coaches are basically saying, I in terms of my estimation, that, just rely on how we do things, rely on our method, getting another year in the system, more familiarity, et cetera, et cetera. So it's certainly leaning that way, but underlying that, if there isn't some systemic or schematic adjustment, then I don't think this coaching staff, I don't think Alex Grinch is doing his job as fully. You can teach turnovers to an extent, but this year we need to see the tackling, we need to see the sure hits, stopping running backs at the first point of contact, getting the better run fits, and not all. It's great if you can rake away the ball, but if the focus is so much on trying to rake away the ball that you're not wrapping up, making a solid form tackle, making a solid hit that stops a runner cold and doesn't allow him to bounce ahead, for an extra 1 or 2 yards on a 3rd and 3 or a 3rd and 4. If you're not, making adjustments to be better form tacklers and better hitters, then something's wrong. So the coaching staff, I think, has a definite lean, but I think it doesn't want to say too much about schematic adjustments, because, it does begin with the players being more talented and being better coached, better prepared. Even if you think that schematic adjustments are necessary, and I would say they are, it's still, you still do need, better players who are better prepared and better taught. If you have that, that would minimize the schematic issue to some extent. Now, how much? That's really the open question. So it's really a fascinating, nuanced debate here at USC.
Matt, there's one player in particular when you address the strength and conditioning side of things that I'm interested to see what he looks like. And then also in particular types of games and particular types of matchups, how he responds. And that's Eric Gentry, who we saw in the early portion of 2022 show that, okay, this is a really unique player who can be extremely effective. He's long and lean and athletic and gets into passing lanes and so forth. So he's a unique player that needs to be utilized and a tremendous addition to the defense. However, the wear and tear of the season, and then you get into certain games and certain game situations, and I just recollect him running into a couple Utah
Yeah.
offensive linemen and running backs that weren't necessarily, in his favor, and it was quite ugly to watch.
Yeah. So Gentry came to USC at roughly 205 pounds, and earlier this summer, it was reported that Gentry had bulked up to 223 pounds. So that's almost 20 pounds of weight and muscle gain. So, so he has definitely taken the hint. He's definitely been aware of, the book on him, how to beat him. And so, how he carries that extra weight and muscle, like making that adjustment, that's going to be fascinating to see. And I would say that for any USC player who's bigger, thicker, and a lot of these guys are, like, that's been a widespread observation. I know Tim Prangley's made that a lot at Trojan Conquest Live. It also points to, in these early season games, it points to the need to not overextend them, especially these first two games in the Coliseum against San Jose State and Nevada. We're probably going to have pretty warm weather. Last year, the opening weekend of the season, there was a heat wave in Los Angeles. It was close to 100 degrees. Like, that was why UCLA had under 30,000 for the opener against Bowling Green. It wasn't just the ho-hum matchup with a MAC team in Pasadena. It's also because the weather was just really hot. And at the Rose Bowl, and it's similar at the Coliseum for a day game or an afternoon game, like, there's not a whole lot of protection from the sun. Like at Husky Stadium in Seattle, you have the big awnings, you have the big, overhangs, and there are a lot of shaded seats in that ball yard, but not at the Coliseum and definitely not at the Rose Bowl. So people are just going to fry in those seats. So anyway, if it's really hot, like, you don't want your thicker, bigger, bulkier players who have gone through this significant bodily change, you don't want them to be overextended. So that's also going to be something to watch. Like, it's a natural inclination. Like, you have the new look Eric Gentry, 18, 20 pounds thicker. He's a bigger, badder dude. Let's give him more action. Honest impulse, a natural impulse. But you have to temper that against, he's adjusting to his body. He's trying to learn how to do this. You don't want to try to do it all at once. And that also brings us back to USC has 6 weeks to ramp up and, get everyone really in tip-top shape for the most important games of its season without giving too much work to any one or two individuals. The schedule is conducive to giving lots of players chances to ease their way into the season. Just as a point of comparison, remember last year we talked about Oregon State, September 24th, huge game. Would USC be ready that early in the season to meet that challenge? It turns out the defense was, offense wasn't. Offense needed a little more time, before it really began posting those elite numbers that carried Caleb Williams to the Heisman Trophy. But this season, you do not have a September pressure cooker on par with what Oregon State was in Corvallis last year, September 24th. You do not have any game with that kind of pressure, any game that's expected to be as close as that Oregon State game figured to be. You don't have any game like that until the Notre Dame game on October 14th. So when we talk about Eric Gentry, and when we talk about the other players on this roster who are bigger, thicker, bulkier, carrying more muscle, it will be important for the coaching staff just to make sure that these guys aren't being given too much too quickly. That you don't put too much on their plate right away, and you make sure that like they can adjust to their bodies, they can adjust to their physiques, and how it fits into their role on the team, how it fits into their assignments on specific plays. There's just a lot for this coaching staff to juggle. Big Bumbo 22, is Kliff Kingsbury going to call plays? No, he's an analyst, so he's not one of the on-field in stadium personnel. But what's important about Kingsbury, and this is the other big preseason camp note that I wanted to bring up for everyone here at the Voice of College Football, and that is over the past week, Kingsbury's influence, Kingsbury's presence in the quarterback room has begun to be felt. That you're seeing Caleb Williams talk about Kingsbury's insight into playing quarterback. That Kingsbury and Caleb Williams have had conversations about Kyler Murray, right? Like I'm sure that's come up. Kingsbury hasn't directly addressed like the connections between Caleb and Kyler, but that's a thing. Of course, Lincoln Riley coached Kyler Murray, and I'm sure there have been conversations about that as well. But that's the Caleb Lincoln Riley relationship that's been established. But Kingsbury's in position to provide whole new layers of that because he was coaching Kyler Murray last year. But you're seeing the quarterbacks talk about Kingsbury's voice, Kingsbury's own observations, Kingsbury's unique insights in the quarterback position. So it's just a chance for Caleb Williams and Miller Moss and Malachi Nelson to all soak up knowledge. And the other piece to this puzzle, the people who the reporters who are following USC on site at practice, they've noted Lincoln Riley is observing the defense more than he has in the past. So that's new. And I made mention of this at Trojans Wire in the offseason after the Kingsbury hire. That was the point. That was the plan all along. You bring along someone such as Kingsbury. It's not as though Lincoln Riley is just dumping this in Kingsbury's lap. No, it's just that Kingsbury can, provide some teaching, can provide some general pointers just as an added voice to build Caleb Williams and Miller Moss's and Malachi Nelson's knowledge base. And Lincoln Riley just has it that can carve out a little bit more time to look at the defense in practices, survey the defensive side of the ball, provide a little more quality control, provide a little more oversight of this defense, because Lincoln Riley knows that his fate, Alex Grinch's fate, USC's fate, it's very essentially tied to the defensive side of the ball. So the fact that Kingsbury's voice is beginning to sink in a little bit in the quarterback room at the same time that Lincoln Riley is, very noticeably observing the defense in practice, talking a little bit more about the defense when he supervises practice. None of that's a coincidence. It's all part of the plan at USC.
Our exclusive content is available here at the Voice of College Football USC, courtesy Matt and myself. We record several segments already there and available for you. We've got about 12 segments. And so catch your exclusive USC content, usually about a 20 to 25 minute segment of just interesting content there, takes, analysis, discussion, debate on the direction of USC football going forward. A lot of takes looking backward, grabbing historical trinkets, and then looking at how that has shaped the landscape of USC football currently and then going forward. A lot of great connections, a lot of great conversations. Again, our exclusive USC content right here at the Voice of College Football. Go to one of the top 2 tiers on the membership plan there right here at the Voice of College Football USC, and you will be all set to dive in on my discussions with Matt. And of course, catch Matt on Trojans Wire And this is the time to do it. Make that a regular stop. Just mark that wherever you need to, bookmark it, make that a regular stop each and every day to catch Matt and the crew there at Trojans Wire.
Do you want to put up this super chat from Gixxer Squid?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Gixxer. We really appreciate your support. So making note of how well Tui Pelotu and Jordan Addison played in their NFL preseason debuts, I think Gixxer, here's the bigger issue that you bring up, any ripple from this. This is the thing. This is the heart of the story for USC football. If you win, if you dominate, if you excel, it's been a tough past 5 weeks for USC on the recruiting trail. Like through the 4th of July weekend, the program was going great guns. Then you had the Dakota Fields decommitment. You lost out on KVA to Notre Dame, taking a number of hits. And so people are understandably a little unsettled, like that it was not supposed to be going this way. Like the trajectory of recruiting was, just going up through June and through the 4th of July weekend. Like what people are wondering, what the heck happened the past 5 weeks? And it's understandable for people to be a little bit unsettled. But here's the point, and I'm relating what Gixxer is asking to this larger question. If the NFL guys dominate, like Jordan Addison, he has a great situation, I think, in Minnesota. I think he's set up for success. Tui Pelotu being able to stay in Los Angeles after his collegiate career, now with the Chargers. He seems to be in a good position. He can learn from, Bosa as a teammate along that front seven for the Chargers. If guys excel in the NFL and if the Trojans win a whole bunch of ball games, they win 11, 12 games this season, they win the Pac-12 championship, they make the college football playoff. If they do that, the recruiting is going to take care of itself, right? Like if USC goes 12-1, like does anyone think that the next that the remainder of the 2024 recruiting cycle on into January and February is going to be a bust? And does anyone think that Lincoln Riley is not going to get every, really prime offensive prospect he needs in the transfer portal? And does anyone think that the 2025 cycle is not going to hit the mark if USC goes 12-1 this season? Like, of course, the program is going to rock and roll. Of course, the program is going to go to another level. So, that's part of why, being at this place in mid-August, I'm enjoying it because, like, when I say we don't need to worry about recruiting, I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm not saying it's not important. What I mean is now we get to the season and now we get to USC's ultimate proving ground. And if USC proves itself, on these game days and, not just, in college, but also with Addison and Julie in the NFL, if you succeed on game day, when it really matters, when everyone's watching, the recruiting, the transfer portal, all these other things, they're going to fall into place. It's going to take care of itself. Winning it cures everything, as has been said many times in human history. So, people worried about the recruiting, worried about the brand, worried about the identity, it's all going to take care of itself. Let's keep in mind that Caleb Williams is, going to be the number 1 pick, assuming that he doesn't get hurt. And USC is going to have a much deeper NFL draft this year, like really beginning to leave the Clay Helton reign of error in the rearview mirror. You're going to have a lot more second and third round picks, a lot more day 2 selections, which is really where the program fell off a cliff under Helton. Pete Carroll was able to stuff a lot of picks in the top 100 during his tenure at USC. You're going to get a lot more of that in 2024. So the winning, the success, that's the ultimate sales pitch for recruiting. Like, it's not a coincidence that Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama are all elite recruiters. Like, they're always making the college football playoff, or at least they're right in the mix. USC just needs to establish that same track record, and assuming that it does, it's going to be right there at that same level. So what's happened the last 5 weeks with USC recruiting, not the way we all planned, not the way we wanted it to be. But if the Trojans go 12-1 this season and are lifting a Pac-12 championship trophy and are heading into the college football playoff, Like, does anyone think the recruiting's not going to rise to that top 3, top 4 level? And, we have to see what Florida State does. Like, Florida State's rocketed into the top 5. So, like, you got to give it up to Mike Norvell to be able to, land this many quality prospects without yet attaining that ultimate proof of concept. I mean, last year's team was good, but like USC was better than Florida State pretty clearly last season, got to a BCS or New Year's Six Bowl. Florida State did not do that. USC really was more advanced than Florida State was last year, and yet Florida State is, recruiting better than USC right now. All right, tip the cap to Mike Norvell. But if Florida State loses to Clemson by a couple touchdowns, doesn't win the ACC, doesn't make a New Year's Six Bowl, which program is set up to have the higher trajectory and has the better long-term future? It's going to be USC. But if USC stumbles and Florida State goes 12-1, well, then the Seminoles are going to keep getting top 5 classes under Norvell. So really, there's just something pure about all of this. I think that's really what I'm trying to say on a larger level, is that now here we are at the season, and the winning is going to be the ultimate sales pitch in recruiting. You also pull in the NFL, Gixxer Squid, and that's really the ultimate message that USC fans should be internalizing right now.
And then to a larger degree, of course, looking at the big picture in this day and age of conference realignment analysis, who's set up to perform down the road? Would that be Florida State and the ACC? And of course, they're kicking and screaming to get out. And we will find out if they will make an announcement before August 15th about their intent for 2024. But making $35, $36, $38 million per season, or USC with the new Big Ten contract in the 80-some million dollar range.
I saw a tweet from Nicole Auerbach on Monday afternoon saying that Florida State essentially has committed to stay in the ACC for this next cycle. But that provides a segue, Mark, into realignment. And I think one of the fascinating points of realignment and, this jump ball and where everything goes, because it does seem up in the air. Like, sitting here right now, I could not tell you, Stanford's definitely going to the Big Ten, or Stanford's definitely going to the ACC, or Stanford's definitely going to try and wing it as an independent in football, or Stanford's definitely going to push the Pac-4 merger with the Mountain West. I have no clue. I have no clue which avenue Stanford's going to pursue as its first choice, or at least in terms of what's realistic. But I will say it's really fascinating how quiet Stanford has been throughout all this, because, Stanford is an academic heavyweight. It's an institutional heavyweight, one of the most highly regarded academic institutions in the country. Now you might have a world view. When I'm talking to viewers here at the Voice of College Football, you as a viewer might have your own opinion of Stanford, maybe the granola crunching West Coast liberals, or, whatever you might whatever else you might think about Stanford. Putting out all that to the side, like, Stanford does have a reputation. Stanford does have a presence. Whether you view that as good or bad, it has a reputation and a presence. Also, it has an endowment of over $36 billion. And that's really where I'm really curious about the politics and the cards that Stanford can play, or at least could contemplate playing in this realignment game. And, in the ACC, as you're well aware, Mark, that, no surprise that Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina would all vote against the Notre Dame proposal to bring Stanford and Cal into the ACC, because, they're all rightly annoyed that Notre Dame would throw its weight around, even though Notre Dame has not chosen to join the ACC as a full football member. There's just a natural animosity and resentment there. You can totally understand that. But of course, the ACC needs 4 no votes to block that Notre Dame proposal, that Stanford Cal plan. And that 4th school is the one that's really interesting. North Carolina State also voting no to, at least temporarily for now, block a Stanford and Cal move to the ACC. And so, on several levels, it's fascinating. I'm not judging NC State. It is fascinating that like North Carolina State seems to be voting along with North Carolina. All right. But, why would NC State want to go along with North Carolina? Those schools are rivals. Those schools are competitors. Like if North Carolina wants to do something, does North Carolina State really want to do the same thing? That's one angle. But the other thing is that when you compare North Carolina and Florida State and Clemson to North Carolina State, like those are uneven situations in terms of leverage and being able to potentially bounce to the Big Ten or the SEC. Like, does North Carolina State think that voting with North Carolina, Florida State, and Clemson affords it a certain degree of leverage in any potential future realignment shift? Because, as I've said, and I've gone on the record saying this here on this program with you, Mark, at the Voice of College Football, I think that in like 5 years or so, give or take a year, but like at the end of the decade, I think Florida State's going to leave the ACC. I think Clemson's going to leave the ACC. Like, they obviously aren't satisfied, but I think they're going to wait for those grant of rights penalties to, go low enough that they think they can, litigate, negotiate, get out of it, cheaply enough, and then make the move that they've always wanted to make, that they certainly want to make right now, but they can't yet afford it. The time's not yet right. So, with those schools, pretty openly, I mean, especially Florida State definitely wants out of the ACC. Like they've had it, they've had enough. With that in mind, North Carolina State's motivation and North Carolina State's leverage, doesn't seem to be in the same place. So it's just very conspicuous that North Carolina State would vote with those other three schools, schools that have more options seemingly and are bigger, television and media properties in terms of their value. It's just very fascinating. And like if you split this a few more ways too, in terms of that ACC voting calculus, why is Wake Forest not voting along with North Carolina and NC State? Why are the Demon Deacons set apart? Why is Duke set apart? Why is Duke not voting with North Carolina, its prestigious Tobacco Road neighbor just a few miles away? And why is Miami not voting along with Florida State against the proposal? Now, so one part of the speculation, the conversation about this is that, the 11 yes votes, that some of those votes are just for show. Like they might not be hard yeses, that they know that there are 4 votes, enough to block the move. So they're voting yes only to curry favor, or at least not look like the bad guys in all of this relative to Stanford and Cal. They want to be on Stanford's good side to an extent, or at least maybe they're trying to leverage the situation in their own way. So maybe those 11 yeses aren't hard committed votes, but nevertheless, like Miami, Wake Forest, and Duke, they all chose to vote on Notre Dame's side. And so, that's part of the intrigue, that we don't know how solid those yes votes are. But if we do assume that those yes votes are solid, in many ways, North Carolina State would seem to be, if you're Stanford, so let's bring it back to Stanford. If you're Stanford, you need to lean on NC State. Like if you're Stanford and you want the ACC, you need to be leaning on NC State, the weakest of those 4 institutions, blocking your move to the ACC along with Cal. And I go back to the endowment that Stanford has. Now, of course, a lot of an endowment at any elite school, a lot of that is earmarked for various purposes. Like you can't just, spend a large portion of the endowment freely, but like, let's just play with numbers. $180 million. All right. That would be 1/2 of 1% of the Stanford endowment. If we put that figure at $36.3 billion, that's 180 million would be roughly 1/2 of 1%. If you're Stanford, do you consider writing like a really large check to North Carolina State for a home and home football series? Maybe you do not just a home and home, but like you do a 4-year series, and you just say, hey, Wolfpack, here's a nice, very, very fat 8-figure check for a football series. And basically, Stanford could buy off NC State, change that no vote to a yes. Boom. Now, of course, that this gets back to, are those 11 yes votes hard and firm? And if not, like Stanford should be testing the waters. Stanford should be making inquiries to those other ACC institutions. Like, are you really solid? Like, do you believe in this? And if not, like, remember, Stanford doesn't have a 2024 football schedule because the Pac-12 is dead, or at least the Pac-12 is in limbo. Like, there is not a Pac-12 schedule laid out for next year. If you're Stanford, I mean, and you want the ACC. Now, I don't know if Stanford wants the ACC. Like, I know that Tony Altomore last summer, he was saying that Stanford and Cal would be a natural cultural fit for the Big Ten. And I'm inclined to agree with him that in terms of the academic prestige, the heft, and also having USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington as travel partners, you can play games with each other in that West Coast cluster of schools. The Big Ten would seem to make more natural sense for Stanford as a landing spot compared to the ACC. But just as a hypothetical and just gaming this out, if you were to just say that Stanford wanted to be in the ACC, Stanford should be thinking about cutting some large checks with ACC schools. Like, let's remember, Notre Dame plays 5 ACC schools as to fill out its independent schedule. So Stanford could consider going independent for 2024 in football, like making that decision right now. Stanford can just stay. We're going to go independent in football in 2024, cut some checks to those ACC schools that might be on the fence to fill out your schedule, and voila, you get the vote, and then you can join the ACC for the 2025-2026 cycle. So like that is a plan. That's like a bridge plan that Stanford could set in motion with the money that Stanford has. You would think that Stanford, if it really wants to make sure it has a Power 5 home, we're getting into George Kliavkoff territory here. If the other pieces are moving around Stanford in ways that aren't favorable to Stanford, Stanford's then playing that same Kliavkoff wait and see strategy instead of proactively moving, locking something down, securing it with the resources that Stanford has. One wonders why the institution hasn't moved more decisively. Now, there have been no reports that Stanford is like leaning hard on NC State or trying to influence the ACC vote, but one would think that administrators, leaders would be having some back channel conversations with ACC schools saying, hey, want to play a home and home with us? Want to play a four game series from 24 through 2027 with us? We can make it worth your while. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like Stanford has the ability, I would think, to be able to make some deals if it really wants that ACC seat at the table. So it's going to be fascinating to see what Stanford tries to do in terms of its influence, in terms of its resources, in terms of its reputation. I just wonder why Stanford hasn't acted yet. And I wonder why the television networks also haven't responded to Stanford, because, and this is one more point to make, last summer, I thought, well, Oregon and Washington were going to immediately follow USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, but network executives said, whoa, Stanford's value per year is actually $15 million more than Oregon is, $45 million to $30 million, because of the Bay Area television market compared to the Portland and Eugene television markets. And so the fact that the Big Ten or any other conference hasn't picked up Stanford, like, that's genuinely surprising relative to the industry knowledge and what a lot of the experts said last summer when we were all talking realignment 24/7 following the USC exodus from the Pac-12 moving to the Big Ten. So it's just really fascinating that Stanford has been quiet as a church mouse through all of this. I'm wondering when Stanford is eventually going to make some kind of a power play behind the scenes.
So, Matt, taking the basic premise that a yes vote by a particular ACC school means that we want solidarity. We want to solidify our conference and stabilize it. We don't want, or we're looking to add value to the conference and go forward as a ACC. And that obviously the dissenters were the ones that want to keep the conference down, want to keep others from entering the conference because then it dilutes their power within the conference. It also changes a number of dynamics within the conference. And in the meantime, obviously, distributes the money to another, even if it's compromised in terms of the revenue share. So it was obvious to see Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina on one side of it. So the curious votes to me were North Carolina State, as you mentioned, and then on the other side, Miami.
Yes.
Those were the two votes that hit me as odd to a certain
Very.
extent. Because basically, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina are saying, we're pushing this to the hilt because we are confident we will have a better landing spot. North Carolina State, I know that they were part of that group of 7 that challenged the grant of rights, but still a bit precarious. And then on the flip side, you would think that Miami would feel confident and want a better deal somewhere else in the Big Ten or the SEC, and that they may have voted in the other direction with Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina.
Yeah, one thing I haven't noted yet is AAU standing. That Stanford is an AAU member, and some of these schools in that are on the fence in this ACC vote, like they're trying to get AAU status but haven't yet gotten there. And so, how much do they want to be seen as an ally or opponent of Stanford? That is another political plot point, an open-ended one, and how that is driving these decisions. I mean, it's fascinating to contemplate. Like, I don't know the inner workings of this. Tony Osborne, I think, could speak a lot more knowledgeably than I could, but it's just that is another political plot point to note in all of this.
So we're going to lead into Ben's question here. And Ben, we thank you so much for the contribution by stating it this way. Based on my understanding of the grant of rights, I'm not in any way here to tell everyone that the grant of rights is um, completely non-negotiable, can't be broken, is rock solid. I hear that from a ton of legal types, and that's the word that's out there from the legal types typically tell you that. On the other hand, I've heard a number of challenges to it. Just a complete buyout that you can obviously throw $600 million roughly at it with the TV considerations, the rights to the home games, and so forth and so out, and buy out the rest of the contract. So you can just flat out buy your way out of it. I'm sure it's a little more complex than that. Number one. Number two would be gain uh, a bunch of allies within the conference to dissolve the conference. That would total 8 of the 14 currently, and you can dissolve the conference. Number three, there's a competitive clause there that, oh my goodness, legal types, if they get a hold of it, could be interpreted a zillion different ways in regards to that the ACC has to be competitive with its competitors outside. And the basic argument would be that because of the disparity in the television revenue between the ACC and the top 2 conferences, that said school could get out of the grant of rights because the ACC is no longer competitive with the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, what may change that dynamic to a certain extent here in terms of the second point that I made about the dissolution, what word am I looking for? The dissolving, the dissolution of the ACC would be what Ben is asking here. Does adding teams change what would be needed for ACC teams to get out of the grant of rights?
See, I wouldn't think so. I mean, I don't know this for a fact.
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
know
want to
either.
play a lawyer on TV because I'm not one. My sense, Ben, is that it wouldn't. But here's something worth considering. And, let's stop for a moment and realize, Notre Dame has been backing Stanford and Cal to the ACC. And, of course, in public, Jack Swarbrick, the outgoing Notre Dame athletic director, he's going to retire next year. He's saying, like, I don't want Stanford and Cal to be left out. What a magnanimous gentleman Jack Swarbrick of Notre Dame is. So kind, so thoughtful, so loving. Okay, what's the real motivation, beneath that superficial BS about just wanting to be kind and sweet to those Bay Area schools? What's the real motivation here for Notre Dame? People might be wondering why Notre Dame would back Stanford and Cal to the ACC. To me, it's pretty simple. I mean, now an underlying reason is, Notre Dame's had Stanford on its schedule regularly. Like, that's been a long running series. So, like, you just being able to include that in an ACC package of games for Notre Dame, like that just, makes the scheduling easier. It gives Notre Dame more flexibility and options. But that's an underlying reason. The main reason is college football playoff access. Because if you pull Stanford and Cal out of the Pac-4, it's not, now this isn't a guarantee, all right, but you dramatically increase the odds that the Pac-12, I mean, obviously it's a Pac-4, but like just struck in terms of as a legal entity, as a legal contractual matter, if the Pac-12 does die, if it is fully dissolved and basically the Mountain West replaces the Pac-12 or takes it over, such that the Pac-12 will, as a legal contractual entity, cease to exist, poof, that's a guaranteed playoff spot removed. And Notre Dame will have instantly increased the odds of getting playoff access, getting its foot in the door. Now, obviously, if you're looking at this from both a Pac-4 perspective, Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, Washington State, and also from the Mountain West, one of the important details to note here is that, the Mountain West executing a hostile takeover of the Pac-4 is not very likely, precisely because if that's how the Mountain West and the Pac-4 do combine, with the Mountain West, gobbling up the Pac-4 schools, if it's done that way, the Pac-12 dies and the Mountain West does not have Power 5 membership. The way for the Mountain West and the Pac-4 schools to do something, if they are going to do something, Stanford obviously has to make the choice. Do we want to do the Mountain West path, or do we want independence in football, or do we want ACC membership, or do we want to make a run at the Big Ten? If Stanford does choose the specific avenue of we want to work with the Mountain West, that will need to be executed in such a way that it's a true merger. It's not a hostile takeover from either side. It's just a blending of schools on even terms, no exit penalties for leaving the Mountain West, going to the Pac-12. It's going to be on friendly terms. It's going to be amicable resolution such that the Mountain West schools and Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford, and Cal, the new conference they form, they will preserve Power 5 status. And preserving Power 5 status, again, as a legal and contractual matter. We're not talking about how good the conference is going to be. Of course, it's not going to be anywhere as good as what the Pac-12 is going to be this year in football and basketball. But just as a legal and contractual matter, if it's a true merger between the Pac-4 and the Mountain West such that Power 5 status is retained, what's the significance there? They're going to still get the payouts, the money distributions and allocations of a Power 5 conference instead of a Group of 5 conference. That is a significant revenue difference. That's obviously something that Oregon State and Washington State badly need to minimize the budgetary shortfall that they're already taking, from not having, a normal Pac-12 next year. It will reduce the extent of Oregon State's and Washington State's financial problems if those budgetary distributions and allocations for the playoff, also for the NCAA tournament, those win shares, those win units that you get for winning a game or when your conference wins a game in the NCAA tournament, preserving all those things, that would be done if the Pac-4 and the Mountain West merge on friendly terms, as opposed to one conference taking over the other, raiding the other conference. If it's a friendly merger, they can preserve Power 5 status. So again, Notre Dame, if you're trying to think about three-dimensional chess and you're trying to think about the Machiavellian scheming way to get what you want or get more of what you want, Notre Dame can pull Stanford and Cal over to the ACC. You basically undercut, you kneecap the ability of what would then be the Pac-2, Oregon State and Washington State, to merge with the Mountain West and preserve that Power 5 entity with those Power 5 money distributions for football and men's basketball. That is, to me, clearly the bigger political and economic play for Notre Dame to improve college football access by destroying legally and contractually one Power 5 conference and getting it out of existence.
Talking Trojans, talking college football here at the Voice of College Football each and every Monday with Matt Zemek. Trojans Wire is your spot to check out Matt's work on a regular basis. Now that it's football season, and you might as well say it is football season, 11 days away from San Jose State at the Coliseum against USC. Check out Matt's work each and every day at Trojans Wire.
And of course, folks, like this week is our last real big bite at the Realignment apple, because we don't have games this upcoming weekend, but next week it's a game week, and unless there's a bombshell, the focus will blessedly be on football, and we'll be previewing San Jose State. We'll be looking at that game. We'll be going through the keys, the plot points. So, if you've had enough of the Realignment talk, hey, I hear you. I sympathize with you. But of course, people drink up this stuff, mentioned it on previous shows. This is like our last really big swing for the fences at Realignment. But next week, I'm definitely glad we'll be able to talk about actual football games. Also going to be glad, to be part of the USC post-game show that's going to come your way here at the Voice of College Football after that San Jose State game. The San Jose State game is 5 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock in Los Angeles, 8 p.m. In the East. So around 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 in the East. Come on over here to the Voice of College Football for the first of many USC football post-game shows. Going to be a very fascinating ride this season.
Just a few minutes before we started the show, I was on Twitter and I saw, of course, in notifications, anytime you're tagged in a tweet, it'll come up in your notifications. And a few people were going back and forth about Realignment and what sites they look at. And I garnished some criticism there from one particular person who cited this person and that platform and so forth, because they're on top of Realignment and they have been able to go along with that particular person's information or speculation or predictions, and said that they were doing it better than I am. And I'm thinking that's not why I'm here.
Yeah,
If you were looking for daily Realignment talk, that is not my mission. So if you're comparing me to whomever else is out there that's on the quest of Realignment talk each and every day, then yes, I'm not your guy. We talk about it when there's breaking news. We talk about it when I make the judgment that there is reasonable speculation, thread of truth, some type of validity to, board meetings, ADs, presidents talking, making comments that have some level of substance to them, and then we discuss it.
That's right. Just one more note about how people love Realignment content, though. Trojans Wire, and I've been the editor of Trojans Wire since March of 2020. I took over the last week of February in 2020. So I've been at this job for 3.5 years now. We've never had 4.5 million page views in a month, but through 14 days, the first 14 days of August, 3.5 million page views, definitely on target to have our first month with 4.5, maybe even 5 million page views, it's not through writing about USC. It's writing about realignment. I mean, it's weird. That's the business, though. You write what people are going to read. That's what guides my paycheck and the size of it. With the bonuses and incentives that I have on my contract. So this is what people want. And I mean, it's not as though we're doing cotton candy, in terms of rank the helmets of all Big Ten schools or something like that. Like I'm offering realignment analysis, some of it speculation, but like all of it informed insight in terms of the politics, the economics, the plot points, all of that. So like it is substantive, but it's not really USC football deep coverage. And we're posting stories on USC football players, USC football plot points, but those don't bring the boys to the yard. It's realignment talk. That has been good for the family business here at Trojans Wire. So just yet another little peek behind the curtain in terms of what drives readership, what the economic incentives are as a site editor, who has to write content every day, keep the Google algorithm happy, keep the SEO beast happy. Realignment is what people have been really clamoring for. And so when you get into that situation, you keep feeding the beast. That's just how this business rolls.
I have some notes sitting right in front of me to produce a video looking at Stanford and Cal and why they would make sense for the ACC and some obvious reasons why they would not fit in the ACC, and then looking at their brief histories against the ACC. And I should probably put that out there sooner rather than later because it's just another, yes, like you, Matt, if you look at the timeline of the main national channel at the Voice of College Football, when Oklahoma and Texas went to the SEC, you see the views and so forth, and then you just see it spike off and then it comes back down, because I did not, truth be known, I didn't take advantage of those happenings, those events, to the extent that others did, and maybe that I should have. I pretty much wring it dry to the extent that I feel comfortable ethically that this is reasonable. We covered it, and then we talked about how the SEC could be realigned and how the scheduling could work and how OU and Texas would compete against the SEC. And once I've used up reasonable topic, I'm done and I'm moving on to the football season. And then you see it come back down. Same thing the next summer, USC and UCLA, straight up in the air. And we do the same thing. We take the same approach. I attack the angles that I think are reasonable, and then we move on to college football. But otherwise, we could talk about this every day, and we would have more views.
Yeah. But anyway, next week, game week, season predictions, all sorts of fun stuff. Can't wait for next week's show already.
Love it. Before we go, Matt, of course, it's very similar to the coaches poll being released 1 week ago, that the AP poll was released today, and USC's at number 6.
Same as the coaches poll, and the top 5 in front of USC was the same. Obviously, you had Alabama and Ohio State flip-flopping at 3 and 4 was different in the coaches poll versus the AP poll, but you still have 3 SEC teams and Michigan and Ohio State in front of USC. And of course, the reminder there is it's very unlikely that 3 SEC teams are going to be in the top 5, and it's unlikely that Michigan and Ohio State are both going to make the playoff together as a combo 2 straight years. Like, you just really have to thread the needle. All the other bounces have to go your way for that to happen. So, just the things being what they are. If USC goes 12-1, Trojans should make the playoff. I think there's very little doubt about that, because what are the odds that 3 SEC teams will get in, or that Michigan and Ohio State will both get in for a second straight year? Possible, sure, but not likely. If USC goes 12-1, this number 6 pole position should really solidify the Trojans, barring, something remarkable like TCU, coming off the radar and grabbing a playoff spot. So that's the simple thing about the preseason polls. Like, I don't invest much of any energy in them. But if there's a story to take away, it's that if USC goes 12-1, it should be good to go for the playoffs.
We are working on 2 consecutive college football playoff decisions by the committee that were pretty cut and dry, not a lot of controversy. It was pretty easy in 2021 and 22. It may work out that way as well this year. However, I see a lot of log jams. I see a lot of controversy. I see a lot of competing teams for playoff spots with similar resumes and records. So it could be really interesting between those various conferences and those opportunities there. Also, keep in mind, folks, that 13 of the 25 in the top 25 preseason AP last year did not finish ranked. 13 of 25 did not finish ranked. 3 of the top 10, I've gone back 3 consecutive years, so who knows before that, but the last 3 preseason top 10s, 3 of the top 10 did not finish ranked at all. Last year it was Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Baylor, I believe, were the 3 teams in the top 10 that didn't finish ranked at all. And those 3 top 10 preseason top 10 teams combined to go 17-21. So don't necessarily think that this is just we have it all figured out and this is the way it's going to be this season. There will be some surprises.
That's what we love about the sport.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you so much for being here, making this work and making this happen, because without Matt, we do not have a show, folks. So appreciate Matt and all that he does, and get on over to Trojans Wire and let's get that figure past 5 million page views for the month of August. Matt, thank you so much. We'll make it back here next Monday at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 Pacific, where it counts.